of eating, an error occurred. Go live. Let's do this again. Um, all right, we're good. We're live on Facebook. We're apparently not live on LinkedIn, so I'm just going to let it go for right now. And hello, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, and this is March, and so it's Women's History Month, and I am so proud to be bringing to you fantastic women throughout the month, including this one right here, Tambra Stevenson. She is the with IamWANDA.org, and I'm going to let you explain all of that. I found her in a Facebook group and then found out she was a member of La Dame de Escoffier, which I'm a member of as well. So I'm so honored to have her here with me. So hi, Tambra, how are you?
Hi, Tracy. Thanks for the invitation to join the conversation today. Yes, I'm the founder and CEO of WANDA, which is Women Advancing Nutrition, Dietetics, and Agriculture. Began more than 5 years ago with the focus of really creating an inclusive food system by investing in the human potential of Black women and girls to unlock their inner food Shero to help heal our communities one fork at a time.
And I started mine. I was like, let's one event at a time. I want to make things more nutritious and inclusive. So in WANDA, there's a lot in there. There's dietetics and nutrition and agriculture. Mm-hmm. So can you share with us what that means in making sure that that we are healthier? We're more, we've got more nutrients in our bodies.
Yeah, being born and raised in Oklahoma and Texas, and going off into nutrition at Oklahoma State, I was surprised to see that nutrition was not housed in the College of Agriculture. So these experiences over time of just being dedicated to health through food and nutrition, understanding that our food comes from the earth and why we should take care of that earth is the only one we have. I take a very silo smashed approach, having learned that how we were thinking about it within the federal government at HHS about bringing, people's superpowers together. And so it's been that focus that has shaped around not only silo smashing sectors, but also generations and geographies, and how no matter where you are around the world, how it's important for women to activate their inner food Shero, because ultimately we are in a time of technology where we can easily, as we are on this platform, share knowledge, share best practices, and make a better, quicker impact. That we can have lessons learned from, our fellow sisters in Nigeria or Ghana or anywhere else, to Louisiana, to California. So that's the beauty about focusing on leveraging digital technology to help create this sisterhood that can be anywhere. And that's been one leapfrog opportunity we've taken advantage of with WANDA.
That's fantastic. And the topic of this presentation, which I put in the thing here, is reclaiming Black food as medicine to ensure health is the new wealth. And I absolutely love that, because in your article, and I'm going to share your article too, that I read, which you shared with me, was on from Eating Well magazine. And there's talk about that Black food as medicine. I love collard greens. I never ate them until I lived in Atlanta, and they're so good. So share about that.
Yes, it was a joy to be able to just take on this project with Eating Well, working with chefs and dietitians, and just the dynamic team, editorial team with the magazine to do this piece. And when it came to shaping the focus of the article and even, the diction and the narrative, it was very clear that one, we've looked at and held up soul food and critically analyzed it, sometimes not always seeing the value of what it represented, but understood that Black food is almost a genre of a larger collective that encompasses soul food and African food and Caribbean, and all these different ways in which we express our culture and identity. And so to be able to do really a first ever kind piece to put the angle from a health perspective, that we know from the field of nutrition was just so timely and relevant right now in the big, larger conversation of food as medicine as a movement. And so, because of the limited research investments that have been made in analyzing the nutritional value of these Black foods, it was also an opportunity to call that and invite people in and institutions to say, where are these foods on our agenda if we're truly dedicated to addressing health inequities in the Black community and understanding that food has no borders, right? There are other folks who are engaging in and enjoying Black food culture. If you go to any restaurant, here in DC or beyond. And so it gives us that opportunity to say, when we make those investment dollars, to understand that the data equals dollars conversation, this is how you build local food economies. This is how you employ and create jobs for women in our communities, because their food is not, angled only in the art of, gastronomy, but also in medicine, and being able to see the value of what it means to equip those who are nutritionists with that knowledge, so they can ensure that they have compliant patients who are eating their collard greens or their njama jama or Swiss chard or, spinach, whatever kind of green that you partake in. We know we have evidence-based practices, and we need to have more evidence when it comes to the health benefits of Black food. And that takes investment from industry as well as government, and for the people to show through the power of public will that the need is there. And this article squarely puts that conversation in front of us and help to build that agenda.
And as I told you before we got on here, there's so much data there and so much great content in here with links to studies and links to research that show that it is that. And you're talking about when I got, and it's a little bit of a tangent, I got diagnosed with food allergies, and I went to a dietitian and I said, this is what I'm allergic to. And she's like, here, go eat. And here's follow the food pyramid. Right. And same kind of thing is like, we need to educate the people who are trying to educate us on food, about these other ways to eat, ways that have been taught. Right. And I don't want to, and I said, I love collards. I don't want to put that as the main thing. There are so many different greens out there, but we see iceberg lettuce, right? Or romaine. And I avoid iceberg lettuce because it's just water, right? So I think what you're doing is so valuable. And it's just showing it's not just a collard. It's got so much more to it. And that's what food is. It's so much more. And I think one of the articles that you said, it's financial, it's economic, it's all these other things, right?
Most definitely. And, to touch on, just the story of collard, I mean, in terms of it for purposes of one of my interviews with Bonita Adib, who is a part of Ujama, which is a cooperative, and in Akakeek, Maryland, where they're, invested in this idea around building almost this underground railroad of seed saving and bringing farmers on board of collecting these various varieties, from okra to millet to sorghum. And it's just amazing to know that through the work of the Collard Project, that their work, Heirloom Collard Project, that they're helping to also tell the story of, how some of these foods even became demonized, and understanding that history is something that gets lost in academia and in nutrition, that takes this very biomedical model. Until I dived into the world of food history, which to me should just be it should be a given course that anyone should take, that know the history of the food, know the history of nutrition, to know where we're going. But she tells a story about that didn't get captured in this article, but just understanding how when we were building economies on collards, on watermelon, at a time in the Jim Crow era, these foods were under attack because it was a way to displace economic opportunities for Black farmers. And that was one piece of historical nugget that I did not even know, but made complete sense from the blackface and the lampooning of a community around dissociating yourself with your own cultural foods. And it's then shows how food is a form of soft power, that you don't necessarily have to take a military might to harm a community, but you can actually use the power of food, use the power of media, and join those pieces together. To me, that was one, why even now I'm working on my PhD in media, because I began to clearly understand that in this digital media landscape, people are bypassing gatekeepers, going online, getting information directly. But is it credible? Is it truly going to help heal you, or is it going to kill you because of the mis and disinformation of health and nutrition information out there? So HERstory to me was powerful. Of one, this idea of being able to tell our stories and having platforms to do that, and to pour that into the next generation of farmers and nutritionists, and just the general public to know where we have come from and how are we going to make the future different.
Yeah, and I there was a guest that I had on the show, I think it was last year, and she's kind of doing what you're doing, but with South America, and because we're losing the history behind our food when we're looking at media and kids are not paying attention to what grandma's cooking in the kitchen or mom's cooking in the kitchen. So those stories that were passed down from generation to generation, 3, 4, 5, 6 generations ago, kind of like that string in the telephone, you're losing that. So what you're doing, I think, is so valuable to bring that back and share those stories, because it is powerful. When you were talking there, and I know that you went to American University, right? So I'm assuming that you took Joanna Mendelssohn's class on food diplomacy or
No, I
gastro
mean,
diplomacy.
Joanna is a fellow Dom,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm in the School of Communication.
Okay.
She's in the School of International Services, which
Mm-hmm.
I do have a relationship with because of the NSF Wasted Food Research Network that I'm a part of. But we definitely communicate to one another, but I've not had the opportunity. But her work around gastro diplomacy, and now what State Department has relaunched, the Culinary Corps, is part of that soft power of
Mm-hmm.
understanding
Exactly.
what food represents and how you can create goodwill by understanding how food is an expression of identity, it's an expression of power, but it's also an expression of communication and creating communion and community at the heart of it. So I definitely see, even the research put into this project with eating well being so important, and along with, empowering that knowledge through the women of WANDA, of recognizing that we have to rethink that it's not just food for food's sake. Food is powerful. It literally can help build economies. People can go to war over a lack of food.
Mm-hmm.
And we can create peace with it as well. So I think for me, it was been so important to be able to just depart and reinforce something that we can easily take for granted. But we see right now what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, it literally can go to a World War III if we know the history of how the other couple of wars began in that region. And a global food crisis is one of those kind of, sparks that can really be set off if it's not controlled well and tamed. And so that's what investment looks like. It's
Right.
containing that fire, and we need to also contain that right here at home as part of our own national security.
So what has been your biggest challenge with what you're doing in getting this message across and pushing this message forward?
Um, honestly, I take, as I tell it to my kids, I take personal responsibility. I'm only one woman, and so if I can clone myself and make more Wanda women, and almost like a military force, food freedom fighters on the front line, protecting our food borders and understanding the role that we can all play as food citizens, and a food democracy, that everyone has to participate and have a seat at the table. Everyone has to see that through the purchases that you make at the store is an expression of our values. It's an expression of how we care for ourselves, and how can we get an understanding of that, and direct that into participating in our local food policy councils, as well as participating in setting up town halls and forums to have politicians to ask the question, where do you stand on building our local food economies, and how do we do that in a way that's sustainable, it's beneficial to the planet, it's beneficial to the people, and it helps to create livelihoods without putting this triple bottom line in harm's way. And so when we begin to think that, we start to see all these other social determinants of our food system that we have to factor in. And so for me, food is just a prism into seeing a world of how everything connects, the fuel transportation issues, just as much as the role that media plays in amplifying certain foods over others, because we don't see advertisements for oranges, but we do for other highly processed food items. So it's this understanding for me that, and then especially having been a nutrition educator in schools, in communities, in homeless shelters, of like, food is so many different ways in which you can educate someone about chemistry and art and math. It's amazing what you can do through the power of food.
Well, and I just spoke Saturday at the School Nutrition Association of Virginia, and I brought that topic up. I'm like, I asked the school nutritionist, what does food mean to you? And they're like, it's nutrition. I'm like, but it's also your job, and it's the farmer's job, and it's scarcity, and it's danger for some. And there's, like you said, I mean, you gave great examples of that. It is, I love that you said it's a prism to see the rest of the world. That's beautiful.
Most definitely. And that's why we've been, since last year, before the White House Conference on Hunger and Nutrition had occurred, put in the policy recommendations to the White House around supporting the Food Bill of Rights, because by doing so, it really begins to look at the right to food as a value that Americans care about, and really are willing to document that, since we love putting pen to paper on things that matter to us. And so the idea is to help inform the future food and nutrition policies in which we bring, we craft, we implement. They tend to be band-aid approaches to work on the immediacy, the emergency issues in a time of crisis. And if you think about it through the lens of health and medicine, you have an ER, right? And we always talk about in public health, if you want to save money, you try to reduce people from going through the ER for an issue that does not deem at an emergency level. Go to urgent care or go to your local community clinic. You save healthcare dollars. Well, this is the same approach, public health approach, I see to food. There are moments when you have to address emergency hunger issues and you need legislation enacted immediately. But then there are other times where it takes a more preventative approach, because you've already put a long-term plan in place. And that begins to thinking about, well, what is the value system? What are the vision that you're setting? And so I think we have not done that as a whole, as a country, to say, these are our values, and how does that flow to the state level, the local level, through our food policy councils, to say we have not just an emergency plan, but we have just a general plan around building our economy around food, and in a way that is helpful, is whole, and it allows the sense of food sovereignty, the dignity and respect that food deserves, and the people who consume it and those who work in it. And we have not gotten there. But the Food Bill of Rights gives us this opportunity to put pen to paper. People can go to iamwanda.org/Food Bill of Rights to sign the petition. We see that the upcoming Farm Bill happening right now over the next 18 months as it goes through its transformational process, that we call upon Congress to think about incorporating and enacting a Food Bill of Rights within it. That would be one way of looking at how nutrition is a big component of that Farm Bill, and how can that be parlayed with this framework, a unifying framework to think about and to do something about how we value food in this country. We have it in the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the right to food, but nothing in a detail that industry as well as government can buy into. And if nothing else, organizations can begin to incorporate this concept and look at operationalizing it when it comes to being local models. We've already had it as a priority adopted by the DC Food Policy Council to research and to investigate how it will be situated at the local level. But ultimately, it should be one adopted at the national level, just as we most recently adopted the AI Bill of Rights that happened immediately right after the White House conference back in fall of 2022. So this is something that if we can have an AI Bill of Rights, we can build the momentum to have a Food Bill of Rights as well.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And it's going to being at that conference the other day. I saw the cumbersome, and I know the cumbersomeness of the food when we're thinking about it in an event setting, but even just trying to feed our kids, right? Going down the aisle of these food manufacturers, repping their food to get into the school system. They're showing that it meets one, thing of fruit, and it meets one thing of beef or, meat protein thing. But it was interesting. I'm like, okay, they're like, do you want to test it? And I'm like, well, only if you can tell me what's in it, because I've got food allergies. And it was amazing how the first 15 people could not answer that question. And I'm like, so it's very capitalistic, the food system is. And there's a lot of things that get lost in that. And not that we shouldn't be earning money from growing food, but I think we need, your Bill of Rights is changing the perspective of how that is looked at,
right,
and managed, right?
Yeah, it's similar to President Biden at the time calling for us to double down on democracy in America and in being a role model of that, especially after the insurrection of January 6th. And so for me, this flows right into every sector of how does democracy show up. It's not just democracy showing up at the voting booth, but also when it shows up to voting for what kind of food system that you want. And what happens, as to the analogy of the ER, is that if you have too much, and this is why capitalism can get a bad rap, is because when you do too much of anything, even if it is good, I can have too much water, hydrotoxicity, and that can be a bad thing. And so you have to think in the same way of the food system. If we have too much power in a few hands, and that power is not distributed across the board, how can you truly say you have a democracy of everyone participating? And that's really the key part here, is being able to have something bottom up from the people to be able to say that we recognize that for too long, the system around food has not been controlled by the people itself, but by those who are profit making. And no harm to that. However, that does not mean that we should also not have a seat at the table. It's almost like saying in Congress of the House of Representatives that we're only going to give the North votes, and the South, you get no vote, but you can come and join and watch us. We would never sign on to that. This is what civil war would lead to. So why, and this is why Senator Booker and so many others have called on this nutrition food crisis that we have is because we do not have an equal balance of power of how people are able to express what kind of food democracy should look like and how can they participate. And right now, if you look at a recent report from Center for Livable Future at Johns Hopkins on local food policy councils, some are housed within government, some are nonprofit. Every state does not have them. Every city does not have them. And these are mechanisms in how people can express their democratic participation in the food system. So if I'm in Oklahoma City or in Dallas, Texas, is where we have had sisterhood suppers, bringing women together to talk about what does food look like in your city? How are you able to articulate and organize and mobilize to change that? There is a lack of road, and that is a problem. And so the idea is we need individuals to feel empowered, that they have mechanisms to be able to channel their voice. And right now, those mechanisms are not in place and equally distributed across our states, across our cities. And for those who do have food policy councils, that is a mechanism to do that. And so that's why we have such a great opportunity now coming out of post White House conference of what will the next few years look like, and putting these this infrastructure in place for people to participate.
That's I started the other day when I was reading your article to look up the food policy for my area in New Bern, North Carolina. So I'm going to say we're rural. We're a town of 30,000, right? We're not Washington, D.C. And I lived in Atlanta for 22 years. Mm-hmm. And the food is much different here, and the access to food and not to the farmers market here. I think there's 4 farmers out of 50 vendors in our farmers market. And I'm like, come on, where are our farmers in this area, right? And making sure, right, like you said, it's not in every, it's not the same in DC as it is in New Bern. So how do we grow that? So you've just enlightened, lit a fire under my rear end to do something different and see what we can do in this community.
Right.
Yeah. So I love the fact, and I was going to ask you about Sister Suppers. So talk about what that is.
Well, Sisterhood Supper began before by 2017 in homes, having those dinner conversations. That really was an opportunity to be the anti-Sunday brunch. The anti-Sunday brunch in DC, it's almost a religion here, where people go to restaurants, they come together, they gossip, maybe around superficial things. And so, yes, your money is going to a restaurant, but what if you actually brought it in-house, in-home, prepared a meal that was good for the soul, and you had conversations of substance? And so my brain thinks like a cultural engineer. How can we re-engineer how we think about the ways and norms of life? And for women, we know we have moved ourselves out of the kitchen as a form of a liberatory tool, but yet the argument for me is the power is in the kitchen, because depending on who controls not only the food of where it grows, but who prepares it, can be a matter of life and death, as anyone knows who's had a food allergy. And so the opportunity for us was to expand it, especially during the midst of the pandemic. We had launched our WANDA Academy with the support of Sibley Memorial Hospital and Johns Hopkins. And we wanted to conclude with a sisterhood supper. And we thought, like, why not open it up to the community and not just to the cohort? And so it became now an annual event on Juneteenth. Now this year will be the 3rd year where we hold a community sisterhood supper for one, acknowledging women who have been those food heroes, helping in the midst of this pandemic, but everyday women who are food heroes, whether they're have restaurants, retail outlets, or producers, or caterers, or educators, or activists. We want to uplift those voices and show other women that we have women on the front line every day fighting to feed and heal our communities, who are role models for our girls. And we bring other women together. We workshop. We have the unveiling of the Food Bill of Rights, getting their voices, creating that discourse around supper time, and having a celebration while you're at it, and being able to pick food from the local farm that we host our event at. And so it really is making that connection from farm to health. And so DC Greens has been a dedicated partner in hosting this sisterhood supper in our community. But it's been one that we've used as a way to talk about policy issues and host in restaurants and in homes. And so it's a variety of settings. And so what happened last year, which was a proclamation by the mayor to acknowledge a WANDA week. And that week is about celebrating the culinary contributions of Black women in the food system, in agriculture, nutrition, and dietetics. And so we are looking to host Sisterhood Supper celebration kicking off Juneteenth as well as WANDA week this year in June as well. And it was an honor to speak to Opal Lee, who is the grandmother of Juneteenth, who was able to get the federal holiday passed by President Biden just in 2021, and recognize that she too is definitely a part of this movement of food freedom. And Juneteenth is known as Freedom Day for many, especially down south, where my ancestors were from Texas, but still enslaved even after emancipation. But understanding that food can be an extension of this conversation of freedom, and what she's doing with her farm down in Fort Worth, being able to grow food and share and heal her community. She really embodies the essence of a food hero. And so we're looking to share her story, and as well as so many others in our upcoming and forthcoming book project, as well as for Juneteenth. Because when we don't amplify the women who have been a part of the everyday of improving our lives, they are just hidden figures in the food system, and we say no more.
I want to be. I don't think I can be there, but I want to come. That's phenomenal, because it is, and there's a lot in there to unpack as well. I mean, the fact that you did say we've taken ourselves out of the kitchen because we didn't want to be there, but that's, conversations with your grandmother happened around the kitchen table while you're snapping beans, or, things like that. But also the value and the importance of the nutrition that we're eating. So, and I do like the fact that you said the hidden figures of food, and there are so many different people in the food system that are hidden, that we don't recognize. We only see those chefs on TV, and that's not reality.
Most definitely. I mean, so many women like Lena Richard, who was a well-known New Orleans caterer. She was a food personality and really made a name for herself, created a cookbook as well. But who knew about her? I didn't know her, or women like her in my nutrition classes. We didn't even talk about the people except those who were the researchers. And I think that's a real disservice when we don't acknowledge that before the field of nutrition even came about, who were the first nutritionists in our lives. And it tends to be that grandmother, that auntie, that mother, and to not, and when you embrace the role that women have played, and now the title of chef has been elevated, where we see mostly men leading in that space, which that too is part of gender equity. But it should not be by stepping on the backs of women to do that without giving them their proper due and acknowledging the culinary currency that flowed in their vein, even when they were not paid even a tenth of what they were owed. And so there is a sense of culinary reparations around this work, of acknowledging that as we move forward, and who gets to make what dish, what is the credit, what is the coins, what is the credentials that come with it, because there was erasure of even women like Richard around whose recipes were given to whom credit was neither deserved, but it was just the way power structures were. And so you can call them, Black women being seen as a ghostwriter for white women at the time in the South, but it was something that is a falsehood to acknowledge and to repent. I think that's the inner Catholic in me, and to say what will be the amends owed for these women, and those who have made a way to heal our communities, like my ancestor Henrietta in Texas in Navarro County. So it's because of her and knowing my own family history, and so many others who I encourage you to know your history and use these kitchen conversations in your own home, whether it's a family reunion. Um, but it's that assignment of having to do a living history interview while I was an undergrad in Oklahoma State that made me see, wow, the power of interview, of just sitting by someone's, you know, side and just hearing their story, how that story is not only medicine for them, but it's medicine for my soul. And I'm forever changed because of valuing the lived experiences, when so many times we're told that we should value some other person's experience that has no direct effect on our lives. But it's the people who we're surrounded by have a more of an impact on our lives, and more of a reason why that is a form of wealth in their knowledge, and how we can pass on that knowledge to our generations. Otherwise, we'll tell ourselves stories when we need to be writing new chapters in our heads.
Right. Right. And using AI to do that. Okay. So, in just writing our future, you've got two kids. What do you see for them? What have they learned from you for the future of their nutrition? And what do you say for other women, that are there, because they're 12 and 13? Is that what you said? For kids their age going forward in this and understanding where they're headed with nutrition.
Well, for mine, early on, I exposed them to not only food toys, but also nutrition education, taking them to the local community farm, but recognizing that the food that you're eating plays a critical role to your health, because not even I knew that growing up, as
Right.
I ate the honey buns and the sodas, not ever knowing there was even a career in nutrition. And so now, I could see my son this week just eating a carrot like Bugs Bunny, right? While he's watching YouTube channels around nutrition that I didn't even prompt, or watching conversations around just medical stories, and really being engrossed in it, even though he has a whole career focus around robotic engineering. Maybe one day he might change to biomedical engineering, not realizing how early on those seeds were implanted in him to see the importance of nutrition and health, and how they are not only good for your body, but you can build a career out of as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, because there's so many things that you can do, and we take it for granted, and I was actually in the food exhibition at the Smithsonian on Friday, and they had the machine that made the first Krispy Kreme donut, and I'm thinking, who came up with this idea? To do
Somebody
that.
who really loves donuts.
Apparently, but your son could be the next Krispy Kreme donut, machine maker, right?
Right.
Of some
And
sort. Yeah.
and that's what I tell them. You can either use your force for good or for not. And
Mhm.
what do we need more of? Do we really need more donuts to feed the world, versus more plants? And so he was never the avatar in my mind when I created Wanda. It was clear that my daughter, who she would probably now have issues with me talking about it, but she had, cavities early on, and seeing the role that her teacher providing junk food as rewards to her and her classmates as a way to manage behavior in a preschool classroom was a concerning to me. And even though I showed up to the PTA where they talk about you should be involved as a parent. Well, my words fell on deaf ears. So what was the point of being involved? And so that's when I started to see the connection, like how can I be advocating for food policies in the city when I can't even make an effective change in the classroom for my own daughter? And that disconnect really bothered me. And it said to me, one, probe and ask questions such as, what are you feeding your own children? Would you allow the same in their classroom? She's saying no. So why is it acceptable here in Anacostia compared to your neck of the woods? And realizing I could either be mad or I can do something about it. And that's when I started writing a children's book so I can go into classrooms to help tell a new narrative, and using little Wanda as that aspirational character, to inspire elementary kids to see themselves as a food hero, and really thinking, how can I, in essence, turn this teacher into a potential food hero, and get her on the winning side, that she plays an important role, not just through education, but nutrition education as well. And so that's where the first seeds of thinking about Wanda came to mind, is growing up in a military town in Midwest City, home of Tinker Air Force Base, and thinking, how can I, turn that average day citizen into a fighter for food, for freedom on the front line. And that's been my mission ever since.
Well, I just found it online and I posted it in the chat of your book,
Thank you so much.
on Goodreads. And that's what we need to do. I mean, talking to a local farmer here in New Bern, I'm like, oh, go talk to the caterer. And he's like, well, the caterer said to me, only if you can give me the prices that I can get from the big distributor will I buy from you. Right. And he's like, I don't want to use that. And it is strictly on his bottom line, which is his prerogative. Right. But it's like helping Stephen, get his food into those other avenues of it. And I mean, his food is in my kitchen, but I want to get his food, further out, to the bigger things. And that is the work that you're doing, and becoming those advocates and food fighters and Sheros. And I love that word. So thank you for introducing that to me. One of the other things that I noticed, and we're coming up on 42 minutes. Woo! You mentioned you have asked readers to take the Black Food Census. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's really the first ever census focusing on Black food as a culture, and how it shows up in media in particular, whether it's the publishing, digital space, apps, but really understanding when we don't have this awareness, we have this omission. I've seen a sea change slowly happen with some apps. Before, you would not see a category for African food or for soul food if you were looking to order food in delivery apps, for instance. And that sense of erasure was problematic. Some have gotten better than others, but it's really taken a stock of what people are seeing in their everyday lives when it comes to making decisions about what services are in their community, what is not, and what information devices they have, and what do they see on those devices. And the idea behind it is, again, if we don't have the data, we can't make any strong arguments for making any changes, whether it's to industry in the tech sector or if it's to government, about understanding the role that media and technology play in food. And we're not having those conversations as we're seeing in the digital health space. But at some point, that needs to be that conversation in the digital food space as well. As you know, countries like Australia, the UK, they have been building the academic canon in this space around digital food studies. And I think we have an opportunity to make a contribution as it relates to a subgenre around digital Black food as well.
Okay. I love that, because when you're looking at it, but it's in then also educating us on all the different cultures of food, and Black food is one of those things that, and I think it's associated with Southern, you know, and that it's bad and it's macaroni and cheese, but it's in your Eating Well article. Everybody needs to read it because it's really good and explains all of that about it. Um, how who you've mentioned some ladies that you really admire. What sheros do you have that have, and what advice have you been given by them in the work that you do?
Well, that's easy. Dr. Creighton's like, get your doctorate. Well, anything that I start, the idea is to finish. My
Okay.
mom said that as well. So it took great trepidation even when I decided to start, because I knew what the voice was in the back of my head, that if I begin this race, I must finish the marathon. And so that is one parting piece of wisdom that I would share to others as well. Be careful what you start, because you must finish. Partly that speaks to just that.
I have a rough first draft. I'm still working on the adjective. Right now, you're.
Partly because it speaks to this idea of, if you don't finish, there will be that part of you that will say, what was the regret? And we don't want to have any regrets in the back of our minds, is
Right.
the critical part here.
Thank you for that message to me personally as well, because I take that to heart. Somebody said that to me the other day. What I started, he's like, "You're still tenacious about it," and I'm like, "I am," and so know that. Shirley Chisholm. Tell people about who Shirley Chisholm is and how she empowers you.
Yeah, Shirley Chisholm, origins of the Caribbean, one of the first Black women to run for the seat for president here in the U.S., was one of those women who said it best, that if you don't have a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And so she was definitely unbossed, unbought kind of spirit, who also advocated very much for some of the programs that we have today, WIC and SNAP. And so she definitely was a voice of Black women at a time in politics that was not very common, but necessary, which is why I know she would sign a Food Bill of Rights, because she understands the importance of power to the people and being able to see your power and use your power in a way that truly helps all and not some.
I was trying to put you on the screen by yourself, and I put me. Sorry about that. And it is, and I love that table. Bring your own folding chair. That's fantastic, because you do have to do that. So what? Because WANDA is all about the women in nutrition and dietetics and agriculture, what's the important for you as a woman? You've kind of said it, but going forward, the importance of women in the food and beverage industry.
Well, as I shared earlier, anytime you have one group of let's just say, call it, hegemonic power, you have to acknowledge that that comes with a very narrow lens and does not provide a wider lens to view any blind spots that others in their own lived experience brings to the table. And so when you have women who have walked that intersectional path of life, they're able to show and bring their full identities and how it can not only be good for business. We know that from the research done about the power of diverse boards and corporations, that it's good for the bottom line. They're able to expand and open up markets because of the representation that they exhibit. And also they're able to bring, if they're allowed and given permission to bring their full selves, they're able to do it in a way that speaks to a value of authenticity that we are so malnourished in our industry, in our country, of looking for a sense of truth and a sense of justice. And that is why it's so important to have full representation at a time like now.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, so two final questions. One is, what is your favorite food and drink?
Well, zobo, which is a Nigerian, specifically Hausa name for hibiscus. Just had it this week, and I make it from the hibiscus flower. And favorite food, so many to choose from, but this week I just had okra and tomatoes that I really enjoyed making.
Love them. Yeah. Do you
So
stew them?
It's it's stewed in my iron skillet.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's something that part of a series for U.S. Botanic Garden that me and my daughter made, and now she's hooked on okra and enjoys it. So to me, that's a win. For someone who loves meats and sweets. And so anytime I'm able to get a win on green veggies, it's always a golden moment.
That's fantastic. Okay, so and my last question for Women's History Month is, how do you want to be remembered in history?
By the way in which I live, which is living a life on my own terms and with no regrets.
That's fantastic. Awesome. Tambra, thank you. I should pronunciate that better, Tambra, so everybody hears the B in there. How can everybody get a hold of you? Where you mentioned the Bill of Rights, I put that link into the chats on everything, but there's your website. How else can they connect with you?
Yeah, on social media at Tambra Raye on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook, and also at IamWanda.org. You can find us on the same channels, and definitely sign up to our newsletter to stay connected. And also, I would be remiss to acknowledge a recent win for WANDA was being a part of a new cohort with other Black women nonprofits in Ward 7 and 8 through the financial support of JP Morgan and Chase, as well as the nonprofit Foundation Center, being able to provide the capacity building to help scale up our work. And so it's organizations and the women and men behind these initiatives that are understanding the importance of investing in women like me and organizations like WANDA, that we need to acknowledge the role that small nonprofits play in being these keepers of the culture and the community. And so I hope this is a message to others that, we're worthy of the investment. And to do that at a time of Women's History Month is making her story shine. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening. And these videos will stay in posterity on whatever channels that you listen to, and it will be coming on audio next month. Until next week, stay safe and eat well. And Tambra, thank you so much for all of the work that you do now and in the future.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Have a blessed day.